they started to camp out. Oh, come in, sit down. Yes, we're talking about old and new cultures. Started to camp out and to exploit the fish. And as we started to exploit the fish, started to exploit the foodstuffs that grew around the river, and then started to irrigate and, from there. It would be remiss of me, though, not to take us down the rabbit hole a little bit, and point out that we have other stories about the origins of civilization, which are based in the mythology of the old cultures. And it's somewhat, might seem a bit out there, but they all talk about beings coming from a far land, teaching small groups of humans, giving them their knowledge, changing the way they lived, and actually changing a direct intervention in the human way of doing things. Don't know who these beings are, or even if they exist at all. It's entirely mythological stories, but you can't go to any tribal culture anywhere on the planet and not find these same stories that suggest another possible origin for civilization. I could carry on this thing a little bit longer. We can even find that in biblical books like Genesis. Because of course the Bible's been retranslated and meaning subtly altered. I'm not going to suggest deliberately, though who knows, but some people may well have had a reason for altering the meaning of certain parts of the Bible. But when we go back into the oldest versions, the Hebrew versions, the Genesis story changes quite remarkably, because instead of becoming God, it becomes the gods, who are physical people. And instead of creating man from the clay, as of course many creation myths have this theme, the idea was to remake man in the God's image. So suggesting that there was already people around, and that these beings who tribal people, the old cultures knew as the gods, in various forms, various names, Nephilim, Anunnaki, and so forth and so on, had an influence in shaping the thinking of man, giving man his knowledge. And even interesting, if you think about the knowledge of good and evil, well, of course, how could you not have a knowledge of good and evil? But one of the ways of looking at knowledge of good and evil, you've got things are, they are not. It's duality. You've got polarity of positions. And I just want to float out there that before we had polarity, we must have had unity. You must have had a single way of looking at things. So those are some interesting sort of things, the origin of civilization. But I'm going to carry on a bit forward, and I don't want to go too deep into mythology, but I wanted to mention that is also there. But the more scientific view is it's all about food, agriculture. So however we like to do it, whether we mythologise back after the fact, we're really never going to know at this point. So it's whatever you choose, however you choose to see it. Okay, so we've discussed, I mentioned, storing grain, storing food. And this became the foundation of what we know as hierarchical civilization. And because once you start to control access to the grain, then you start to control access to other war resources. Wood to build your houses, cloth to make your clothes. And you start to have systems where effectively the individual has to justify their quality, their qualifying for resources which are centrally stored. You see, in the old culture, in the tribal way, a group of 20 to 50 humans supporting each other all the way through their lives, there are a number of things that culture gave de facto as a right, in such a way that it would be impossible for tribal people to actually think about it any other way. In the modern world, we run around like crazy, looking for security. We want to know that we're going to be looked after, and we have to chase these illusionary energy credits we call money, in order to have this material security. But for 193,000 years, that was the innate birthright of every single human being. The idea that any human being would go hungry in the tribe, the idea that any human being would not have basic provisions, would not have shelter, would not have clothing, would not be looked after if they were ill. Impossible. Impossible. Simply impossible to even think about it. You know, that was the innate nature, cooperation. But once we got into settlements, then the nature started to shift into the nature to being about power. And whereas the older cultures were about attunement to the environment, the new cultures became about growth and development. That became about exploitation. Of course, we all look around the world now, we know what the world is like, you know. And we've seen that very clearly. And we can look in the last 50 years at the enormous growth in the human population. We've gone from 3 billion people in 1950, what was it, 3.2 billion, something like that, to 6.5 billion. No one's really got an accurate count at the moment, but it's pretty clear that the human population of this planet has boomed. It's doubled in a very, very, very short, intense length of time. And that growth has been founded on food supply. Because we're animals in one aspect of ourselves anyway. We are mammals, we're organic beings. And like all organic beings, our growth as a species in the ecosystem, in the environment, is bound up with the availability of food. You know, no food supply, no food for people, no growth for people population. It's that simple. And the people population growth in the last 50 years has all been based on exploiting oil. Yeah, because we've been taking oil from the ground and we've been using that oil to create fertilizers and pesticides. So effectively taking the energy inside that oil and converting it on a massive scale into biomass to produce crops. And that's what's produced this explosion in human population. So really the last 50 years kind of are an illustration in itself of the very mindset which has been with us since the beginning of civilization, where we started to view ourselves as separate from our environment, we started to view the needs of the city-state, the needs of the settled population as greater than the need to be in harmony with what the environment can provide, and we started to exploit. You know. So these are really fundamental. This is really fundamental to community, because the difference between the two views, the tribal view of being in harmony, the civilized view, I can start doing Russell Hike, civilized view of exploitation, these are actually the fundamental stories that the two different forms of culture have told each other. One of the things about civilization is it's been enormously contagious for a variety of reasons, but once you start to gather food together in one place and have a massive store of food, well, you start to think, I need to protect my massive store of food against other people who are going to want to take it. And you think, well, we haven't got so much, and they've got a really big store of food, so we ought to go and get their store of food. So we start to develop conflict. Because another remarkable truth, which is just simply not talked about in open society, really, is that prior to about 10,000 years into our immediate past, we can find no evidence of warfare whatsoever. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, I mean, you think, well, mankind, brutal, animalistic nature, we've been at war forever. We've always been killing each other. And part of the story of civilization has been to say people who don't live in a civilized way must be savages. But in actual fact, the evidence simply doesn't support this. There's no mass graves, no sites of battle, no anything like this before about 10,000 years ago. So the link of civilization, agriculture and conflict is also a very real link. It's not that tribal people didn't compete with each other and tribal people didn't have disputes between tribes. But what is clear from the study of the tribal cultures that still exist, the fragments of this previous way of life, is that these conflicts were resolved in a ritual fashion. And, you know, someone might get jabbed a bit with a spear, but they wouldn't be gutted. You know, and the idea of just going out and killing people was utterly foreign, because tribes of families. And no one wants to see their family